I'm Jessica Guadalupe Tovar of the Local Clean Energy Alliance. I'm also the coordinator of an alliance called the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, which some of you on this webinar today are a part of. So shout out to East Bay Clean Power Alliance. And yeah, I just want to acknowledge that our power with the Local Clean Energy Alliance has really been building alliances with other organizations and efforts on the ground to pretty much bring justice to our energy system, and noting that energy has been a problem and has been hurtful in many of our communities, and really we're working towards solutions that flip the script to make energy a solution in our communities. So that's really been our emphasis. So welcome. And I want to start off with a little background of how we've gotten to this discussion today. Earlier this year, well, technically, I should go back farther than that. About a year ago, we started hearing that our local community choice program was considering nuclear energy. Needless to say, that was a very triggering thing that we were just like, wait, what? Nuclear? And then the picture started to unravel that the nuclear energy was going to be coming from PG&E's Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. And the story became uglier and uglier as it unraveled. It's a long story, but community choice programs customers are forced to pay a fee that PG&E, other monopoly utilities, and the CPUC has enabled, called the Power Charge Indifference Adjustment, or the PCIA. And pretty much what that is we are subsidizing PG&E's bad energy choices, including their own PG&E nuclear power plant in San Luis Obispo, the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. So on top of nuclear energy not being clean, and the fact that this is about taking energy from PG&E, and also even more problematic is the fact that that this would actually stall the efforts of clean energy that we have been working so hard for, to actually actualize local clean energy, such as solar, such as wind, battery storage, energy efficiency, demand response, and all the other efforts that we really have been emphasizing. So we know the difference, right? We know that nuclear energy is a false solution to climate change, and we know that there's an extreme push for that from the industry. So we organized and we created a petition. We did everything we could to spread the word to our community group organizations, and we were able to actually defeat, back in April, specifically April 22nd, Earth Day, was the day that the East Bay Community Energy Board was considering whether or not to add this nuclear energy to our community choice power content mix. And about 64 community members spoke out against taking nuclear. Looking at the notes, about 86 people in total had weighed in saying no nuclear. The result of that was that I believe it was 10 of 15 board members voted to not take nuclear. And I want to appreciate everybody who weighed in, a lot of which were also youth. Folks from New Voices Are Rising and the Youth versus the Apocalypse. So here we are again, the same year in the fall, and the issue of taking this nuclear has come up again. So what we want to make sure is that we continue to speak out against nuclear energy. And I think you've heard or most people have heard a lot from us, from the local Clean Energy Alliance, from different members of the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, such as the Sierra Club and the many organizations. So tonight we want to listen to the communities, to the experts, community members who deal with nuclear issues, and technical experts who deal with these issues of nuclear on a regular basis. Our current fight right now is potentially that this will be discussed either next week or potentially in December. Either way, we're gearing up for it. So thank you for joining us tonight. I want to introduce our very first speaker of the night. And just to acknowledge that we actually have had several allied organizations, but just to acknowledge that Robert Gould of Physicians for Social Responsibility in San Francisco, who's our first speaker tonight, has been with us from the very beginning. The day that we were advocating for a community choice program that specifically committed to investing into a local development business plan, a plan for a Green New Deal for Alameda County. And Robert was one of the many organizational reps that were there with us that day. That was October of 2016, I think it was. So just to acknowledge that participation since then, but also I really want to appreciate that support and the fact that, Robert has done a lot of work to really address this issue. He graduated from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine from 81 to 2012 and has worked as a pathologist for Kaiser Hospital in San Jose. And since 2012 has been the associate adjunct professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences at University of California, San Francisco. And also the president of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility. And very importantly, he's also on the board of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, serving as the North American co-vice president. So without further ado, I would like to bring Robert Gould to speak to you.
Okay, hi everyone, and thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. And it's been really wonderful working with you all. So my first challenge here is going to be sharing my screen and my talk. So I think this is right. Well, that was pretty smooth. That was a real surprise to me. Okay, just going to gear up here. So can you all hear me okay? Just want to check with that. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm always nervous about talking into the void, particularly first off. So thanks again for the invitation. I actually have a lot of slides that I'll apologize for. I'll be going through rather quickly, but I did that deliberately, knowing that, as I understand it, these slides would be available. So I'm going to touch on a variety of points, not the entire picture of nuclear power tonight, because we have many other wonderful panelists who will be able to fill in that I don't cover, but this will be available. So pardon the speed that I'll be going through stuff. And okay. So again, as you've heard, I've been working with Physicians for Social Responsibility locally and at the national level for many years, and our work, as stated here, is to protect human life from the gravest threats to health and survival. And for most of our current work is dealing with what we regard as the twin existential threats of nuclear weapons and war and global warming. And within the interstices of that lays our opposition to nuclear power because of the connections with nuclear weapons, as well as we do not see it as being the solution for climate change. This, of course, is the 75th anniversary of the twin bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki that by the end of World War II led to the deaths of over 210,000 innocent human beings who died from the combined effects of heat, blast, and radiation, all of these impacts being depicted here in a typical bombing run slide that we have shared with people over the years. As you look at the lower part of this chart, talks about the varying impacts of radiation at a distance from one of these explosions, and we've learned much about what the impacts of radiation are on human beings from these bombings and the studies of the survivors of Hiroshima, who not only suffered all those deaths, but also were, particularly because of the radiation, led to many problems down the line in terms of genetic problems, reproductive problems, and cancers. And much of this information about radiation health was actually withheld from the victims of the explosion for many years, as it was within the Marshall Islands. Sorry, I'm just having trouble advancing my slides. And again, I'm going to go very quickly through the radiation, particularly ionizing radiation, which does so much damage, consists of alpha, beta, and gamma rays with varying degrees of penetration in tissue and with intense damage, as this slide shows, of the radiation effects, harm to the DNA, the genetic material of our bodies, to tissue proteins, breaks chemical bonds that can lead to cell death and the generation of cancer. And we've learned a lot over the years with many revised studies about what the harmful effects of radiation are. The National Academy of Sciences has convened many studies over the years. The most recent one, the biological effects of ionizing radiation from 2006, reinforced our understanding that there is no safe dose of radiation. The graph depicts what we call linear no dose hypothesis, but at any level, there are some effects, and particularly seen, if not in individuals, on populations. And this is just another example that you'll be able to look over, just showing that all of these, even for the things we would need in terms of diagnostic tests, x-rays and such, all of them have some degree of radiation, but we're very much concerned about the amounts that could be generated from a nuclear power accident or exposure to operating reactors, exposures to workers which are at higher levels of radiation and can do more damage. And when we're looking at this, just to set the sort of frame for our panel tonight, we have to look at the whole chain of the whole nuclear chain, whether this is for nuclear power or for nuclear weapons, ranging from mining to processing and enrichment. And we recognize the fact that nuclear power has, and I'll come back to this, has been a springboard for developing weapons programs throughout the world. And this chart just exhibits the multiple pathways that one could be exposed from a leaking reactor, from any other radioactive accident in food and water and the air we breathe. Currently, throughout the world, we have 440 operating nuclear power plants in 30 countries. And it's actually, my correction here, it's, as I understand, it's about 10% now of global electricity production. And I'm going to focus on some of the downsides, not all of them, in terms of the total situation around nuclear power, focusing on notable accidents, as well as what we would call horizontal proliferation, being able to be diverted to weapons programs. Here's a list, and again, you'll be able to study this in much more detail, going through up until the early part of this century. Very significant accidents that took place, as you could see, partial or near core meltdowns, close to a total core meltdown in 3 Mile Island in our own country, which led to a real a halt of the inexorable progress of nuclear plant siting and, in our country. But I'll focus on what the impacts of two of the most notable can't call them accidents because you could expect that they would happen, and they will ultimately. But Chernobyl in 1986, taking place in the Ukraine near Belarus, 400 million people were exposed to this accident in around 20 countries. And this is some of the toll that we know as of the about 10 years ago, report from the Union of Concerned Scientists showing the degree of contamination. Significant numbers of people were evacuated. As of 2005, we could attribute 6,000 thyroid cancers and 15 deaths to radioactive iodine released, and overall significant numbers of excess cancers and excess cancer deaths emanating from this disastrous situation. Although many proponents of nuclear power will often point to post-accident scenarios as being an area where wildlife might be selectively seen as proliferating, Tim Masseau and Anders Muller in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists a number of years ago pointed out that with real detailed look, they're seeing major mutations in wildlife, and this was backed up as well by another study cited here on the effects of ionizing radiation for Chernobyl on mutation rates in a variety of species, and showing more what the impacts are on people still living there is that people are still having food and milk contaminated by the impacts of Chernobyl. And it's particularly poor people who need to forage in the forests for food and continue to do so in an area where there's great poverty and unemployment are subject to ingesting foodstuffs, mushrooms and stuff that are contaminated by radioactive cesium and other radioactive elements. More recently, of course, we're all very familiar with the disastrous impacts of the three meltdowns at Fukushima in Japan. We published this very close to the Fukushima disaster in PSR, showing impacts on the thyroid, other radioactive releases of concern of radioactive cesium and strontium that lodge in the bone and could be the nidus of developing future cancers. There's been some debate over the impact of the release of radioactive iodine, which incorporates in the thyroid, on thyroid cancer, particularly among children in Japan. There are a number of scans and follow-up biopsies that showed a greater incidence than what would have been expected. But some of the controversies that have occurred has been comparing it with latency period of developing tumors from the Chernobyl experience, as well as some issues that do come up in the medical literature about if you're sampling a lot of people, you'll turn up more cancers. But this continues to be something that is continued to being looked at carefully, particularly among those who've been exposed within Japan. Since that time, there continues to be significant amounts of radiation within Fukushima, as this article in the New York Times profiled about 2 years ago, including enormous amounts of radioactive water that remains in the area, spilling into the ocean with potential and some measured contamination of fish and other sea life. Of course, our concerns here with reference to the situation in Japan, as in many other countries, as many of our own nuclear plants have same design risks as are the Japanese counterparts. The issue that I will close on in interest of moving the panel along are those related to proliferation of weapons, both civilian nuclear power plants as well as military production yields radioactive materials that could be brought into weapons programs such as enriched uranium and plutonium depicted here. And the nuclear power industry globally not only provides the potential material, but the technology and the scientific cadre very useful for developing weapons programs. Historically, Dr. A.Q. Khan of Pakistan, as this brochure shows, literally marketed these types of skills and capabilities to many other countries. And He's had an established role in the development of the weapons programs within North Korea, possibly with the potential weapons program within Iran, which of course progress towards originally was halted with the Iran deal that President Trump oversaw. Although our country did not have a problem back in the 1970s where we had a friendly ruler in Iran who was open to developing nuclear power in that country. Currently, we face a situation of possible proliferation of weapons based on new nuclear power programs in countries such as the United Arab Emirates, as well as within Saudi Arabia, raising concerns for the possibility of more nuclear weapons proliferation in this area beyond the nuclear arsenal of Israel. Of course, there are many more weapons than these potential programs that could potentially bring going online in the near future. There's still over 13,000 nuclear weapons held, with 91% of them by the United States and Russia. And these continued dangers since the time of our founding back in the early 1960s against the dangers of nuclear weapons have led us to refocus our organizing on curbing nuclear proliferation, particularly in wake of our efforts with many colleagues to get the United Nations to pass the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which the overwhelming number of nations, 122, voted for in July of 2017 over the continued opposition of every one of the states that possesses nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapons states. And that included opposition from our own government, including the Obama administration had made the famous speech in Prague in 2009, looking for the abolition of nuclear weapons. This treaty is set to go into force as international law within 90 days, with Honduras just being the 50th country to ratify. In line with this momentum, we've developed a program in association with many partners, Union of Concerned Scientists, Sierra Club, and many others. The Back from the Brink campaign, which you could see on preventnuclearwar.org. We have 5 major planks to renounce the option of using nuclear weapons first, to take our weapons off of hair trigger alert, not to let a president fire off nuclear weapons all by he or herself, to cancel our plans to modernize nuclear weapons that are slated to cost $4 to $6 million every hour over the next 30 years. Think what we could do for a Green New Deal instead, and to pursue a verifiable treaty to ban nuclear weapons. Our planks of these positions were brought up to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 2018, which passed some of them, fully supported by the City Council of Los Angeles in 2018, and with both houses of the legislature here in California in 2018, with new resolutions having moved forward in California, in Eureka and Arcata, and more recently in Berkeley, just before the 75th anniversary of the nuclear bombings. So here in California, I think we're exhibiting a great deal of inspiring leadership in terms of the work that we're doing, both against nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And I hope, and we certainly at PSR hope to continue working with you all in terms of stopping the continued encouragement of using nuclear power evinced by this wonderful community effort in the East Bay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate it. And I know you're very busy and you need to get to the next meeting. So I wanted to actually take some questions that we caught in the chat. And there was also a comment. One of the comments was surprised that the church rock uranium still isn't on here. I guess your list was one of the comments.
Okay, first thing, Jessica, I could stay till just before 7, so
Okay.
I don't need to put pressure on it. I'll just flip channels.
That's
But
okay.
yeah, I don't have, that was not an exhaustive list of all of them. It's just it's a slide I've been using for talks, so I didn't mean to keep out any other important. There have been numerous accidents or near accidents. and significant contamination beyond that list. And that was just a very abbreviated list. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, thank you. And then another question was, isn't California and the PG&E nuclear power plant on an earthquake fault line? That was
Yeah, I figured other speakers, particularly Jill, would be addressing that. Again, I had a narrow focus, but yes, and that's just like the TEPCO plants in Japan around the ring of fire of earthquake activity. I saw some comment the other day about somebody said that building a nuclear power plant is a really unique way of finding earthquake faults.
Okay.
No, it's Dan Hirsch. It was Dan Hirsch. Dan, I'm sorry.
Well, that's a
Not
great
giving the credit
segue.
off the top.
That's a great segue. So our next speaker is Daniel Hirsch. I actually, for the first time, got to see a presentation that Daniel gave to the Monterey Bay Clean Energy Program, and I forget the new name, but I was very, very inspired by that presentation. And so just to acknowledge that, Daniel actually retired in 2017 as the director of the program on environmental and nuclear policy at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And he's taught many years at UCSC and before that at UCLA. He is president of the Committee to Bridge the Gap, a nuclear policy NGO, a 50-year-old nonprofit organization focused on nuclear issues. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Daniel Hirsch.
Can you hear me? And do I have ability to share the screen now?
We can hear you, and let's see. Can you?
Looks like I can share the screen.
Okay, excellent.
Second here. Okay. So to get your blood flowing for a moment, I want to make it clear that I am a strong supporter of nuclear power. I believe all of our energy should come from nuclear power, so long as there's a safe distance between people and the nuclear power source. And that safe distance is 93 million miles, the distance between us and the sun. Any closer is just an unacceptable risk. So nuclear power, okay, so long as we keep it 93 million miles away, which is solar power. So I had been asked by Mothers for Peace to make a presentation before the Monterey Bay Community Power on an issue very similar to what you're now facing in the East Bay. Monterey Bay Community Power wanted to take what are called attributes from nuclear power. And they rammed that through without the public being allowed to really weigh in on it. Mothers for Peace insisted that there be clear presentations made about why it's a bad idea. They kept being told no. They kept insisting, and eventually we had a hearing, and I was allowed to make a presentation. I'm going to give you a small section of it about what nuclear power really entails. And so the question is, what are the attributes of nuclear power? First of all, it produces radioactive waste that is dangerous for tens of thousands of generations, proliferates nuclear weapons. There's a risk of meltdown and widespread contamination, risk of terrorist attack, releasing large amounts of radioactivity. There are environmental justice impacts from pollution from the uranium mining and the milling. It diverts money from renewables, which is really important when you hear the claims that by the nuclear propagandists that nuclear power is a possible contributor to solving the climate change problem.
I don't think we're getting the notes that you think we're getting. Your screen.
You're not seeing it. You're not seeing the screen at all. Help me, please. You're not seeing?
It's there. We can see your screen.
Let me do it so you can see the whole thing. Is that better?
Yeah.
But not what he's talking about.
I'm really puzzled. What I'm not talking about?
Well, you're pointing out with your pointer various things that you have written down that you think you're showing us, and we're seeing a map of Morro Bay, San Luis Obispo, Diablo Canyon reactors, and we're not seeing what you're telling us.
Okay, so that's a problem. We're on the wrong pages of the PowerPoint. So you're not seeing the page about attributes, you're seeing the maps of Diablo. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And I keep telling it to escape, and it isn't escaping. I am stuck.
Again, this is Bob. You don't seem to be in the PowerPoint presentation mode. It's like, you know, still where you have your notes and things like that.
So you,
As
when I just
opposed-
shifted pages, you can't see that either?
No.
Okay.
Dan, why don't you stop sharing and then restart sharing?
Stop it and see if we can get, I'm sorry about this. And by the way, I have a poor internet connection, so it's possible that I will lose you. And if that happens, you should then go to others and see if I can sign in again. So here we are with the PowerPoint. And I don't know if you are seeing.
Yes, there we go. Attributes of nuclear power.
We're on the right page now.
Yes.
Thank you for calling that to my attention.
Very, very good.
So very quickly, again, there's radioactive waste, proliferation, meltdown, terrorist attacks, environmental justice impacts. It diverts money from renewables. And although it does have lower carbon emissions than fossil fuels, it has much higher carbon emissions than renewables. First of all, it's not clean. Can you see the second page? Have we gone to it now? Okay. Long-lived and toxic nuclear waste. So nuclear power plants produce immensely long-lived radioactive waste. These wastes, you can see in the upper left, some of the spent fuel. If I had pulled out a single fuel bundle and had placed it in your room, by the time we had gotten from the beginning of this presentation to now, you would have gotten a lethal dose. Immensely radioactive, immensely long-lived. I don't know if you can see this dot here. That is a symbol of how long the United States has existed. This is how long human civilization has existed, and this is how much time nuclear waste remains radioactive. We produce 50 years of power from our nuclear plant if we get lucky, and 500,000 years of radioactive waste. We produce not just high-level waste, but other kinds which are often just disposed of in unlined trenches. All of the dump sites that have been built for that have ended up leaking in just a period of a few years. Here's San Onofre with the high-level waste that is put 100 feet from the ocean and about 1.5 feet above groundwater. Ionizing radiation causes numerous kinds of cancers, leukemias, genetic defects in offspring, and various other health effects. Second issue, and this is what's driven most of my life, nuclear power proliferates nuclear weapons. We're now stuck again. Okay, so here is 1946 Crossroads nuclear explosion. Diablo Canyon, for example, produces 0.5 ton of plutonium every year. That's enough for about 250 nuclear bombs, each of which will be more powerful than the one that destroyed Hiroshima. So nuclear power plants are factories for nuclear bomb material. Next, it's not clean. They can suffer meltdowns, releasing vast amounts of radioactivity and rendering large areas uninhabitable for generations. Here's a place that I've spent 40 years trying to get cleaned up that most of you may never have heard about. It's in the Los Angeles area. The first reactor to produce electricity for the commercial grid was at the Santa Susana Field Lab on the LA Ventura County line. However, within a few months, it was also the first to suffer a partial meltdown. Students of mine, when I taught at UCLA, uncovered these photographs showing the melted fuel from a reactor with no containment structure in the midst of the Los Angeles area. Kept secret for 20 years till my students uncovered it and released it. Fuel is not supposed to look like this, and you don't want it to melt because when it melts, the radioactivity can be released into the environment. That was not the last partial meltdown. 3 Mile Island came along in 1979. Then Chernobyl in 86. And that was not just one reactor melting down and catching fire and exploding, but it was 3. Absolutely astonishing. Excuse me, so that was, this back here was, anyhow, just keep going. Fukushima, 3 reactors. And this picture says it all. When you have to have a Geiger counter run over a terrified child, you know it's not a safe technology. What Bob was mentioning was not my definition, but David Brower's, that a nuclear reactor is a complex technological device for locating earthquake faults in California. You build a reactor, we'll find earthquake faults. The main reason for that is because the people want to build the reactors never search for the earthquake faults before they start building them. Here's Diablo Canyon. When it was first proposed to be built and got its construction permit, they argued, PG&E, that there were no faults within 30 kilometers of the plant. They got the construction permit, and after the plant was 80% constructed, the Hosgri fault was found coming within 4 kilometers of the plant, able to produce ground motion if in an earthquake much greater than the plant was designed to withstand. NRC let them go forward anyway. After that, the San Luis Bay fault was discovered. And then after that, the Los Osos fault was discovered. And then finally in 2007, the shoreline fault was discovered, which comes within 600 meters of the reactor. So instead of no active faults within 30 kilometers and no interconnections, it's now known that there are 4 nearby faults and several interconnections. The fault basically runs from north of Santa Cruz, where I live, to south of San Luis Obispo. And the longer the fault, the more capable of ground motion and more damage to the nuclear plant. So let me, if I may, stop the screen sharing and just kind of conclude for a moment, and then later we can, if you have any questions. What MBCP was asked to do was to take attributes from nuclear power, not actual electricity. The electricity split off, but just the supposed greenhouse gas attributes. And we were able to stop that. And I urge you with East Bay to push them very hard, push that they let you make some formal presentations so that the information is really before them. I don't know if what they were proposing is the same as what was proposed for us, but what they were proposing for us is it turned out that our executive officer had been purchasing these fictional attributes for years from large-scale hydro, spending real money that could have gone to solar and using it to buy these fictions so that they could tell their consumers that they were 100% carbon-free. So what we've now done is we've gotten our community, CCA, to not take the nuclear attributes at all, and to now move towards not buying any attributes and diverting that money to real renewables in the communities that are served by the CCA to be installed by low-income folks and aim it at the homes of low-income folks, so you get both greenhouse gas reductions and real money in the pockets of people who are really hurting. So I would urge you to find some way to push your CCA to remember that there are 2 things that they are selling. One is clean power, and nuclear is as dirty as it comes. And the second is community choice, which is you don't ram dirty nuclear down people's throats, and you don't pretend to be greenhouse gas free when in fact you're buying and getting dirty power from natural gas at the moment and also from nuclear. You can win this, but you're gonna have to push hard because the nuclear industry is gonna try to push hard to prevent you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate that. And yeah, what the message that I want to send to East Bay Community Energy is don't nuke our Green New Deal. Nuclear energy has no place in our clean energy future. So I just want to acknowledge, first of all, I'm just like blown away, but you know, we haven't had the opportunity to have an expert like you, Daniel, speak at East Bay Community Energy. And I really do hope at some point, and we are recording this, and we did invite East Bay Community Energy board members tonight. I don't know if any are here, but we will definitely be sharing this recording. And even if East Bay Community Energy does not give you the floor, that is why we organized this discussion tonight. So I want to appreciate that. So our next speaker is Jill ZamEk of the San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace, which I'm also very excited. And just to acknowledge that, you know, frontline communities are also experts, you know, in these environmental justice issues. And certainly as somebody who lives by the nuclear power plant. Jill is a recently retired elementary school teacher, and she's been an environmental, anti-nuclear, and peace activist since her college years. As a matter of fact, the first organization she joined was Dan Hirsch's committee to bridge the gap. At the time, the focus was the opposition to the Vietnam War. Jill joined San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace in 1981 when the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant was still under construction. She's worked with these wonderful, mostly women, ever since and has been a board member for many years. Her role and collaboration with the San Luis Obispo Climate Coalition expanded when Monterey Bay Community Power, which is now Central Coast Community Energy, voted to accept nuclear into its power mix. And just to acknowledge that Mothers for Peace and the community fought back and won to have that decision reversed earlier this year. So without further ado, here's Jill. Thank you.
Hi, are you going to share the screen for me with the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So, I'm Jill ZamEk with San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace. And my main message is what our other speakers have said, that nuclear energy is neither green nor sustainable, and it has no place in the power mix of community choice aggregations. Next slide, please. I moved to the Central Coast in 1976, and I was completely unaware that PG&E was constructing Diablo Canyon. And I should say that I grew up in the San Fernando Valley and by Santa Susana. So unbeknownst to me, that happened. We weren't told about it. We weren't given the opportunity to evacuate. I didn't find out about that until I was an adult. Anyway, back to my story. In 1981, I joined the Abalone Alliance blockade and the unsuccessful attempt to stop the licensing of the plant. I spent 6 nights in jail along with thousands of others in this huge and really very exciting anti-nuclear protest. That year, I also discovered and joined San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace. This organization began in 1969 to oppose the Vietnam War and then morphed into a watchdog group for the nearby nuclear plant. Most of our work has involved legal challenges involving the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. 1984 was especially significant to me because it brought the birth of my son and Diablo's low power license. In 1986, my daughter was born and Diablo received its full power operating license. And for those of you who are responsible for the care of others, you will understand the weight you feel to protect your loved ones from danger. Diablo has given me cause to fear for my family all these years. And as an elementary school teacher, I had their lives to protect as well. So the highly anticipated closure of Diablo in 2025 lessens the danger, but does not completely eliminate it. For the high-level radioactive waste will likely be stored there for many decades into the future. Next slide, please. So what are these threats? Accidents from a variety of potential causes. As Mr. Hirsch has told us, Diablo Canyon is surrounded, I think, and you can see in the picture, 13 active earthquake faults. The Hosgri sits 2.5 miles offshore. The shoreline lies directly under the plant. So a seismic event is definitely one potential cause for radioactive release, but so is human error, an act of terrorism, and very likely for this very old plant, aging systems and components. Next slide, please. 3 Mile, there you go. 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. We must not forget nor minimize the environmental, health, and economic impacts of radiological accidents. Next slide, please. The waste. Nobody can deny the fact that our civilization has no solution for the safe, secure storage of high-level radioactive waste. That alone should have stopped this source of energy decades ago. Now we're left with material that remains toxic for 250,000 years and no method for isolating it from our environment. Pools and casks provide only short-term solutions. The concept of consolidated interim storage is foolish. Why move high-level radioactive waste along highways through towns and cities twice? And why would we give private for-profit companies ownership of such dangerous materials? And why would we subject others to suffer the consequences of our toxins? Mothers for Peace is a proponent of leaving the waste at the site of generation until a permanent solution can be found. An exception would be San Onofre, which sits at sea level. Next slide, please. There are some myths about nuclear energy, but fact number one is that nuclear energy is not carbon-free if you consider the complete fuel chain. And that was, as mentioned before, mining and milling the uranium, processing it, transportation, plant construction, plant operation, and decommissioning of the physical plant. You might argue that every source of energy has some carbon emissions, but the nuclear energy production chain compares poorly to those of renewable energy sources. Fact number two, by definition, nuclear energy cannot be classified as renewable because uranium is a finite resource. And if you're relying on Diablo Canyon for grid reliability, you may have to rethink that expectation. Unit 2 was offline from July 17th until August 1st for a hydrogen leak involving the new $90.3 million stator. It shut down again on October 22nd for the same unresolved problem and remains offline. Meanwhile, Unit 1 was offline for refueling during this same time frame from October 6th through November 9th. Next slide, please. Here is East Bay Community Energy's claim on its website that it purchases clean power. But nuclear power is dirty and it's dangerous. Think waste and think 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. In its proposal to purchase nuclear power, East Bay Community Energy risks tarnishing its reputation and losing allies and customers. This betrayal of trust is not worth any potential savings. Furthermore, this purchase would support a failed, dirty industry. It would encourage the nuclear industry to vigorously pursue small nuclear modular reactors and other advanced nuclear technologies, which, despite being smaller, are also dirty and also dangerous. Next slide, please. The CCA in my region, Central Coast Community Energy, abandoned its consideration of purchasing nuclear power and abandoned as well the purchase of carbon-free attributes. There were several convergent reasons for their decisions. 1, community uproar and reputational concerns. 2, the increased cost of carbon-free attributes. And 3, the California Energy Commission's new regulatory changes. CCAs must purchase the power and attributes together, and there are stricter rules of content labeling. Purchased nuclear energy will show up on their content label. Customers expecting clean, renewable power will not be happy customers. And last slide, please. In summary, and to repeat my big messages, nuclear energy is dirty, dangerous, and expensive. It is not green or sustainable, and it has no place in the power mix of community choice aggregations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jill. There was a comment in the chat about where to get this resolution by what was Monterey Bay Community Energy, but is now the Central Coast program. So folks are interested in looking at that. And another comment that came during Daniel's presentation that and applies to yours as well, Jill, is that because of the cost and the dangers of the waste problems, nuclear power is actually the most expensive source of energy, and obviously the most potentially dangerous. So yeah, a lot of concerns around that. And folks, please keep your questions and comments coming through the chat. We still have another speaker, and I want to invite our next speaker up, Leona Morgan. Leona Morgan is from New Mexico. She is Diné and grew up on the Navajo Nation. She is a community organizer and activist who has been fighting nuclear colonialism since 2007. Leona co-founded and works with Diné and No Nukes to address uranium mining as part of the entire nuclear fuel chain and Nuclear Issues Study Group, which works to protect New Mexico from all things nuclear. Leona collaborates with the local, regional, and national groups to address nuclear waste issues in the United States and is part of the international campaign, Don't Nuke the Climate, that focuses on nuclear energy as a global climate issue. Leona attended the University of New Mexico and lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So welcome, Leona.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica, and to all of you. Thank you for the invitation. So I just wanted to start off with a video. This morning, I'm going to do a presentation, but I wanted to share some information because a very dear friend and sister in the fight against uranium mining and nuclear development passed away from cancer. And so I just want to dedicate my presentation to her and to honor her. Her name was Deborah Whiteplume, and I have a clip of a video that I want to share, and she's in it. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'll continue with my presentation. So this is, just give me a second here to make sure. It's just a trailer, and the filmmaker gave me permission to share the link with all of you to watch the full length video.
Someday the earth will weep. She will beg for her life. She will cry with tears of blood. You will make a choice if you will help her or let her die. And when she dies, you too will die.
I lived in Lone Min, South Dakota, which is one of the hottest spots for this radioactive water. That's the water that I drank for the first 6 months of my pregnancy, was that water. I have an 8-year-old girl who was born with all these severe medical anomalies. We were like, well, what did we do? And I wasn't gonna blame Mother Earth.
Attention No Frills customers, there's a 9-year-old girl named Layla waiting for a kidney transplant. Please stop outside.
We need a live donor. So that's why we're doing this benefit, so I could live.
Right where they mine, there's a connection right here to Pine Ridge, underground in our aquifer. It's scientifically proven our water's been contaminated by that corporation, Chemical. This water is the children's water. That's why we fight for it. So these are real enemies in front of us, the mining corporations.
Okay, so that's just a really short clip of a longer film about the impacts from uranium mining. And I invite you all to watch the full film, which is called Crying Earth, Rise Up. So as you can see, it's a multi-generational impact to people living in communities dealing with uranium mining. And so I'll just restart my presentation. First of all, I want to introduce myself in my people's language. My name is Yat E She Leona Morgan Yinshka Tworich Eatni Nishla Sanabisni Bashichin Kia Ani Dashiche Twoglini Dashinala. So I'm Diné, and my people are from the Four Corners region, also known as Navajo. And I have a presentation. I'm going to try to go through it quickly, and some of it is a repeat of things that we've already heard tonight, but I was only planning to share a couple of pictures, and I think maybe folks can have a little bit more visual idea of what are the impacts from uranium mining and nuclear colonialism. And so nuclear colonialism so I got a definition here. Basically, it's the ongoing colonization of our lands, ongoing genocide and harm to indigenous peoples worldwide from the production of nuclear fuel, as well as nuclear weapons testing and so on. And this also includes depleted uranium and other impacts. And then today I'll also talk about a threat of the waste storage. So my people have been impacted by uranium mining. And so this is a simple, infographic about the nuclear fuel chain, but this is only focused on the energy production, not the weapons. And so just be clear, you cannot have one without the other. Some of the byproducts of nuclear power are the same ingredients needed for nuclear weapons. So as you can see at the top, we have uranium mining, there's exploration, mining, milling, and processing, and all of those are very, very dirty processes that are at the start of the nuclear fuel chain. So uranium is used for both energy and weapons, and at the beginning of, it's at the beginning of the fuel chain. I just want to point out a lot of these steps that you see here, they happen all over the country, but we actually have many of them in the state of New Mexico. And the thing that we're talking about is tonight with the waste from Diablo Canyon and all the other reactors in the country is high level radioactive waste, which is also called the back end of the nuclear fuel chain. So one of the things that was said earlier about the myth, the false notion that nuclear energy is clean or renewable really comes from this miscalculation of the carbon footprint. So if you look here, this is the nuclear power plant. The calculation of the carbon footprint is only considering this aspect of the nuclear fuel chain. So the construction, operation, and decommissioning of a nuclear power plant. It does not count all of the steps before. It does not count the long-lived radioactivity of the waste that we know will be radioactive for a very, very, very long time. And so just moving on. Oh, and then one of the things they like to tout, the nuclear industry likes to talk about how the emissions from the power plant is just steam, which, is also radioactivity, but they don't count, the transportation around the world and monitoring the waste forever. And so I just wanted to, I'm just going to show a couple quick images on the impacts of the past uranium mining. The majority of the mining at the beginning was all of it was for weapons and defense. And so it left 15,000 abandoned uranium mines across the country. The mining was done predominantly before there were any environmental regulations in place demanding that the companies clean up their sites before they left. And so there are a lot of places where they left structures, they left uncapped exploratory drill wells, and then just, lots of contamination, a lot of waste from both mining and milling. And so on my nation, the Navajo Nation, this is not our entire homelands. Our entire homelands are within the Four Sacred Mountains. This is the reservation in the Four Corners area. There's 523 abandoned uranium mines, and Navajo is working with, the Navajo government is working with the federal government to do some cleanup. So just to give you a rough estimate, 523 mines that they identified, they started doing some cleanup in 2008, and since then have completed 3 sites. So if you just do some really simple math, 3 sites over 12 years. Now, considering there's 520 more, it will take over 2,000 years to clean up at this rate, granted if, you know, if there was funding available. However, that's always the issue is, you know, no funding to clean up the mines. So that doesn't include the other 15,000 across the country. And so some of the things we've heard, obviously there's a lot of general public concerns when it comes to anything nuclear. The contamination, of course, the invisible radioactive contamination is huge. For us on Navajo, we know there's a couple health studies specifically on impacts from low-level exposure, long-term exposure, and that they're listed here. I can put some websites in the chat on where to look into those more. And then it's expensive. It actually makes climate change worse because the money that is needed for nuclear and how long it takes is taking valuable resources away from renewables. And this is one of the images from one of the projects I work on. If you go to radmonitoring.org, we know that the measurements of impacts from radiation are measured with a really sexist, discriminatory way to measure called reference man, which does not consider, which is a 35-year-old white male from a Western European country who eats a good diet. And so that does not take into consideration the differences between the how women's bodies absorb radiation compared to men's, and then also children. And so the measurement of the radiation, I understand, comes from about 1 meter off the ground, so the source of the radiation and the impacts to this reference man's reproductive organs. So what does that mean for a child or a unborn person who is the most vulnerable? And so I just have a couple more slides. I know I'm over time. Someone mentioned the church rock spill of 1979. This is one picture of one community that's impacted by uranium mining. And so if you consider that uranium mining happens on indigenous communities around the world about 70 to 80% of the time, it's a similar story for all of the places. I'm sure I don't know if it would be as bad because this is one of the most contaminated places, but I've heard lots of stories all over the world, very similar, just substitute out the company and the community and the culture. So here's Redwater Pond Road. This is the name of the community. This white dot here and here, these are the houses of Diné people who live between uranium mines. So these are old mines. They're no longer operating. Navajo Nation passed a law to say no more mining in 2005. So here's a mine site here. There's another mine here, and then another one just off the image, very close. So they're living between 3 uranium mines. And then down the road from the mill that was processing the mine from this mine, that was processing the uranium from this mine. The mill is where you crush and grind the ore, and then you use chemicals to leach out the uranium. And that creates a lot of solid and liquid waste that they were storing on this side in this yellow circle. And on the morning of July 16th, the earthen dam, basically the clay wall that was holding in all the liquid waste broke, and it released over 90 million gallons of liquid waste into this ditch that connected to the Puerco River and then flowed eastward into Arizona and possibly reached Las Vegas. That's when it became a concern because of the higher population areas. It wasn't a concern for the media or the government, and definitely not for the companies when it contaminated our people's land and water and food sources. So the people still live here. The area, this is one of the areas that's in the middle of cleanup. And just to give you an example of what cleanup means, there's a proposal right now to move the waste from this mine, to move it on top of some of the mill waste, which is in a floodplain. And so the communities are concerned that if there's another big flood, it'll result in a second church rock spill. And these are just all the sites in New Mexico. I'm gonna put the link for this map. So this map, it's tiny, but New Mexico has all of these facilities that I mentioned some earlier. And then the biggest one that we're concerned about is the waste disposal. So just going back to the uranium deposits in the world, I wanted to show you, zooming into the United States uranium deposits. This is taken from USGS. You can see these red areas where uranium was mined, and then just overlap that with a map of the proposals for nuclear waste storage. So these these pink dots are all of the nuclear power plants in the country. So right now in New Mexico, what we're dealing with is a proposal to store waste from all of the reactors here in southeastern New Mexico, just 13 miles north of WIPP. So this is different than WIPP. WIPP is waste storage for transuranic waste from weapons production. And so the idea is just to put it here temporarily until there's a permanent place to put it. So you can see the juxtaposition of the uranium areas that were contaminated. The uranium went somewhere else in the world for either weapons or energy. And now they're trying to bring the waste back to us, this highly radioactive waste. And so this is the issue that we're dealing with. And there's two proposals. Right now there's 80,000 metric tons of this stuff in the country. Holtec International wants to store more than double that. And then just 40 miles east of there on the Texas state line, another company is proposing to store 40,000 metric tons. So these are issues that we're fighting right now. They're going through the NEPA process. The comments for the draft environmental impact statement, that period has passed, and then we're expecting the final EIS next year. So because of all this horrible information and news, I just wanted to share a little bit more uplifting pictures. These are indigenous communities united fighting against uranium mining around the Grand Canyon. And then we have some folks in Japan, fighting also the same, issue. And then internationally, we're dealing with, this is Don't Nuke the Climate, which is working to dispel that myth of nuclear being clean and renewable. And I'm going to put a lot of links in the chat for some of the resources that will help. So thank you. I'm so sorry I went like way over time, and really appreciate the invitation.
That's totally okay. I'm so glad that we were able to hear from you, Leona. So thank you for agreeing to educate us today. We have some comments from the chat too, related to, and a question related to your presentation. Somebody mentioned that elders from around the nuclear plant in Glendale, Arizona, reported that when the plant started operating, the taste of animals had actually changed, because this community is obviously dependent on subsistence hunting. So the taste of the animals in the area changed as a result of the nuclear power plant. Question that we have for you is, some climate activists argue that electricity from nuclear power plants, because it is carbon free, is a better option than electricity from natural gas power plants. Can you comment on this argument? Leona or
Is that for me?
else? I think so. I think that came during your talk, but
Well, that was a question for anyone.
for
Okay.
anyone, thank you.
I'll chime in if someone else wants to take a stab at it first.
It looks like Daniel.
Sure, let me try to respond quickly. First of all, there may be a few genuine climate activists who say that, but most of the people who are saying that are anti-environmental people who've repackaged themselves as propagandists for the nuclear industry. They call themselves, for example, Mothers for Peace and I and some other groups are having to deal with a petition to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission from a group that calls itself Californians for Green Nuclear Power. George Orwell must have been hired to help them come up with these names. So first of all, I think very, very few real climate activists take that position. But secondly, here's the answer. The choice is not between carbon and plutonium. That gives new meaning to the old idea of pick your poison. The choice is between carbon and plutonium on the one side and the sun on the other. I once had a meeting some years ago with Henry Waxman, a congressman who chaired the Energy Committee of the Congress. And in his office, he was telling me, don't you think nuclear power would be able to get us carbon-free stuff faster and cheaper? And I said, listen, it's always more expensive than they claim, cost overruns, time overruns. And if you just replaced your single pane window with a double or triple pane window, got rid of those incandescent lights and put some insulation in here, you would be able to get the equivalent of having to build new nuclear plants if we do serious conservation, serious efficiency, and renewables. So if you are concerned about climate, the last thing you want to do is dump your money, scarce resources, down the rat's hole of nuclear power. You're diverting it from the stuff that really can do something about climate change. And then don't forget, there are 10,000 generations after us that will curse us for having left behind that nuclear waste. One last comment, Leona showed this marvelous map about the uranium mill tailing pile and the dam that broke in the Rio Puerco. There's a famous photo that says it all to me. There was a photo of the Rio Puerco River after the tailings had burst and polluted the river. And the sign says, "Don't drink the water." And there were about 20 cows drinking the water because the sign had not been written in a language that the cows could read.
Mhm.
We've got to move to a situation where we aren't polluting the planet for tens of thousands of generations to get a tiny little bit of power now. So natural gas is bad. Plutonium is worse. The sun's pretty good. And that's the real choice.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? It looks like a lot are coming in the chat.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, when we're talking about nuclear energy development, it's going to push for, like right now with the so-called Critical Minerals Act, or uranium helping for energy independence or whatever. Those are all just that's all political jargon. It's not. In reality, nuclear is not carbon free. They call it low carbon, as I explained, because they only calculate part of the actual carbon footprint. But really, it's something to consider. And this is why I want to make it really clear and showed some of the pictures and talked about, Deb, is the human impacts. So just because, if people are saying these things, usually they're not considering the human rights or the health or the cultural impacts. So for example, Grand Canyon is a place that has uranium, the Black Hills in South Dakota, as well as a mountain in New Mexico. And these are all sacred places. And so so some of the impacts are not just the contamination to our water and our the impacts to our human health, but also the cultural impacts that are immeasurable and will hurt Indigenous peoples, our way of life forever. So aside from the energy aspect and the carbon footprint, there's the human rights, the human health, and then also the cultural impacts.
Right on. And Sutta is commenting that they're all sacred areas as well. Yes, absolutely. There is a question around, and I don't know if this is for Leona, but maybe it's our major environmental groups, anti-nuke, like the Sierra Club 350, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, for example. Leona, is that any of the groups that are working out there with you?
So I think some other folks might know better with Sierra Club. I'm not a paying member of Sierra Club. Sierra Club has, in the past, there were some higher ups, I think, in the board that actually thought nuclear was also a good transition energy. So within the Sierra Club, there's a group called the Nuclear Free Campaign. And the Nuclear Free Campaign has several working groups. One is the front end, which is uranium. And they themselves are a minority within the bigger National Sierra Club that are organizing within the Sierra Club. And the Sierra Club actually just passed some, I forget what they call their official documents. So they're in the process of correcting that idea that nuclear is green. So Sierra Club is being worked on by Sierra Club members in the actual organization. I know, I'm not sure about 350. Greenpeace is obviously anti-nuke. Friends of the Earth, anti-nuke. And then someone mentioned Michael Schellenberger, who was a previously anti-nuke, who flipped to start touting the same rhetoric of the nuclear lobby. But basically, there's a lot of people and institutions, and this is one of the most harmful things, especially within the United Nations work on climate, trying to reach the goals of, trying to stop climate change. But there's what's the name of this, the institution? The IPCC and the IAEA are both international institutions that have called nuclear power low carbon. And so this is something the world states are using and exploiting to try to build nuclear facilities, especially in people of color communities in the global South. So we really need to educate across the board, elected officials and others. And a lot of it is because of capitalism. I mean, these companies have a wealth of money, and internationally, they're trying to get at this thing called the Green Fund, which is supposed to be for, paying for renewables and actual low carbon energies. So it's basically a fight for resources, and I think, of course, these people don't care about human health and human rights. So it's really important to get these big enviros on board and then to educate them as well.
Right. Just to acknowledge, out here in the East Bay area, our San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club's actually been active, working with us. They're part of the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, and active in fighting our community choice program from taking this nuclear. So here they've been very good. So they got work to do to get folks out there to be on board and be anti-nuke as well. Let's see. Any other questions? Okay, I think somebody had a question about what strategies we can use. Somebody was sharing that they're from New Mexico, and usually a lot of things just get approved. A lot of bad decisions get approved no matter what. What can we do to help educate people, and certainly acknowledging that education alone is not enough. So strategies, if Jill or Leona had anything to contribute to that question.
I'd like to speak to that. I think coalitions is the way to go. I think the bigger the voice, the better. So I'm thinking, like, for instance, Mothers for Peace is just joined a national nuclear waste strategy group. That's and so it's groups from around the country. And I know when Mothers for Peace worked against Monterey Bay Community Power at the time, it was with a coalition of groups. We have to have more people and more power and more people power to make a difference.
For sure.
And just to add, right now, I want to invite your organization, Jessica, and others to a national campaign that's being developed. We have a national network of folks. I know Jan had a question. Jan is a member of one of the organizations, and actually Mothers for Peace is part of it. I'm in communication with Molly Johnson, a good friend of mine. And so we're just about to launch a public national campaign, which is all coalition building. So I would, if you all are interested, Jessica or whoever, the different organizations that would like to get involved, there's a need to address the Nuclear Waste Policy Act on a federal level. There's always bills in Congress that are trying to fund what's called consolidated interim storage. So the image I showed for the two proposals, for short, we call those CIS. So those are supposed to be temporary storages. And then the permanent storage is supposed to be Yucca Mountain, which will never take waste. So there's always funding, there's always bills in Congress to fight dealing with funding for CIS and Yucca. So those are on the national level. And then locally, you all are doing exactly what we need to be doing, is the local organizing. And so the national campaign, it's really got four goals. So we want to stop yucca, we want to stop CIS, we want to promote safest storage, and some people call that HOS, which is hardened on-site storage. And then the fourth goal is to, I'm spacing out right now, but we also deal with the small modular nuclear reactors, and yeah, so those are some of the bigger goals, and we need as many people as possible to help us with those. And the campaign is so new, we don't even have a name yet. So I would invite you all to join us. Maybe you can help us find a cool name.
Thank you so much, folks. That was one of the comments. How can we support Leona? We are running out of time, so we do need to wrap up. I know there's a lot of other comments and questions. I would like for us to save this chat and see if some of them can be addressed maybe in our follow-up email after this webinar. So I want to thank our panelists so much for their time and for sharing their expertise with us. We really, really, really absolutely appreciate you and your struggle. You know, our struggle is your struggle. That's pretty much what I sought to do tonight, was really to make connections between, you know, what we're being told here is that we need to utilize this energy, but knowing that there's another story and other communities are impacted, it just reaffirms why, you know, we need to refocus on what is actually true clean energy and having it local in our communities, so that we can create those clean energy jobs and stop exploiting other communities for the sake of energy. We need to have learned from our mistakes and not repeat those exact same patterns, right? So I did wanted to leave you with just a little bit, we don't have a lot of time, but with some facts that I learned recently, that actually Diablo Canyon has been offline since October 15th. And my understanding is that there was recently, I guess, there was a leak recently, and other issues, I guess. The power plant is old and it had needed repair, and as a result, it's kind of like you know, when you refer to your old car and it starts breaking it down and you take it to the mechanic and the mechanic says, well, this is going to cost you $1,200 to fix, but your car's so old, you know, I don't know if it's really worth it. You know, and next thing you know, you might put that money out, fix the car, and next thing you know, you have either a new breakdown in the car or the same repeated breakdown, right? So that's the same situation with the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. It's old, it's unreliable. And why are we trying to give new life to something that needs to be put away? That we need to be done with this and move forward with that clean energy transition that we've been fighting for. So to East Bay Community Energy, we don't want you to nuke our Green New Deal. It has no place. Nuclear has no place in our clean energy future. So I want to ask folks for your support for the local Clean Energy Alliance, if you can, when you can, if you could please donate to us. We actually had stepped away from our fundraising because of COVID, realizing that other organizations and other issues needed to be addressed earlier in the year. So we didn't proceed with the type of fundraising that we normally would under normal circumstances since the pandemic shutdown had taken place. So I do urge you to support us. We are a small organization, lots of volunteers, a few part-time staff. So just a pitch for you, if you're not already a donor of the local Clean Energy Alliance, we invite you to support us that way, either a one-time donation or a monthly a monthly donation. And also, we want to invite you to join us in this fight against nuclear energy in our East Bay Community Energy Program. There is a board meeting next week. We will be updating you on where things are at, and we'll be able to provide you with how to sign up to testify to the board, talking points, all the things you need to weigh in and join us in this fight against nuclear energy in our community choice program. So with that, I just want to thank you all for joining us. This has been a really educational, inspiring, and humble webinar, and I really want to thank our speakers one last time. If folks could, you know, use your reactions, clap your hands, and thank our speakers, Jill, Leona, Daniel, and Robert, who is at his other meeting. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Until next time, clean power to the people.